Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. We are heading into the home stretch of this 2043 baseball season, and in some ways it has been a brilliant season for the Pirates. That includes the fact that we've got a 628 winning percentage, despite the fact that over this past offseason we lost several key players that we either had to let leave as free agents or we had to trade away because they were getting too expensive in terms of their arbitration salary numbers, and our budget had been cut after last season. So the fact that we've been able to bounce back and thus far put up the best winning percentage we've ever put up in our 6 years now as general manager of the Pirates is a really good thing. So that's the positive news. The negative spin on things is that despite that success on the field, we would be in a wild card game at this point if the season were to finish right now, and we're only half a game away from actually being a road team in a wild card series if the playoffs were to begin right now, because we're a game and a half behind St. Louis in the NL Central. And at this point, we have 4 of the top 5 teams in baseball in the NL East and the NL Central, with the Braves and the Mets and the Cardinals and our Pirates, in addition to the Rangers. And one of those 4 teams is going to end up on the road in a wild card series for the first round of the playoffs, in all likelihood in the National League. So even though we're having a dream season, it's conceivable that we could end up on the road against the Mets or the Braves in the first round of the playoffs, despite a winning percentage that is going to be the best number we've put up. Fortunately, we're only a game and a half behind St. Louis, who, as you can see, is playing incredible baseball, and they've made up 6 games on us over the last 10 games with their 10-0 record and our 4-6 record. So hopefully we can play better, and hopefully they'll come back down to earth. It would be great to get past them in the NL Central, which would presumably mean, barring a fantastic finish by one of the NL West teams, that we'd have a first-round bye in the playoffs and then have a home series for the NLDS. So that is still our primary goal at this point. If we're unable to achieve that, though, the main thing is to, at least at that point, get into the number 1 wild card spot, likely ahead of either the Braves or the Mets, to ensure that at least we'll have a home series for that wild card series if we do end up having to play there. Taking a look at our top performers with the season about 70% over, perennial all-star Isaiah Hill having another brilliant year, 322 batting average, 31 homers, 99 runs driven in. And Tony Santana, our ace, is having the best season of his pretty solid career. I don't want to call it a brilliant career, but he's been brilliant this season. 16-1 record with a 2.95 ERA and 164 strikeouts and 131 and a third innings pitched. So he has been excellent. And the other big contributor to some of the success, the surprising success we've had, has been bringing up Jose Montoya from AAA. He's 5-3 with a 3.74 ERA as a starter. And then also bringing up former number 1 overall pick Henry Gonzalez to make his major league debut. And he's hitting .283 with 16 homers and 46 runs driven in and 279 at-bats. So the addition of both of those players has been really important to the success that we've had thus far, and hopefully all the players I mentioned are going to continue playing well the rest of the season, because we are in a big-time battle right now. And given that we are in a playoff push, we did add a couple of players right at the trade deadline. Left-hander Angel Calvan joined us. You can see he's already pitched one game for us. Picked him up from the Astros to give us a second left-handed arm out of the bullpen. And then we also picked up Nelson Torley, shortstop from the Dodgers. Just a pretty versatile player, can play pretty solid defense at second base. Actually can play excellent defense at second base. Pretty respectable at shortstop. Could certainly also play third. Just gives us a little more flexibility in the infield. Another left-handed bat. Don't think he's a great hitter at this point, but does just give us a little bit of insurance if we suffer any injuries to second baseman Victor Serrano, third baseman Jaden Dixon, shortstop Tony Cota, or our key utility infielder Juan Rivera. Good to have Torley on board. We knew he was going to be out with a day-to-day injury when we picked him up. We actually put him right on the IL because we don't have an obvious person that we want to send down for him. Clearly, when he's ready to come, we're going to put him on the major league team. Probably will mean that either Omar Vieira, Andres Mendez, or Sean Barley is going to head down to AAA. But we'll wait and make sure that the wrecked veteran is healthy to hopefully help us in this push for the playoffs. And taking a look at our schedule for this month of August, got some tough series to start against San Diego, who's in the mix in the NL West, followed by Boston, who's leading the AL East. Then we get some division matchups against the Brewers, and then a critical 3-game home series against the Mets. That could be one that could go a long way towards determining if we do end up in a wild card, whether we're going to have home field advantage for a wild card series or not. Then it doesn't really get any easier with a Washington team that right now would be the third wild card. Then we've got the Cubs and Blue Jays, Marlins, Cincinnati, and then back against Milwaukee at the end of the month. So I think that this first 2 weeks of the month till we get through Washington is potentially more challenging in terms of the quality of the teams that we're facing. So hopefully we can be over 500 over these first 2 weeks, take 2 out of 3 against the Mets, and then fatten up a little bit in the second half of the month when we've got a few teams on the schedule that aren't quite as highly regarded. Well, another good news, bad news situation. Our manager, Jan Vasquez, has agreed to a new contract, which is good. The bad news is that we're going to be paying him a lot more than we have been. We were paying him $400,000 each of the last 5 years since we promoted him from bench coach. And now he's going to be making $1.25 million, which is a big number for a Pirates organization, but he's got really good relationships with the team. He's obviously guided us well over the 5 seasons that he's been a manager. We're well on our way to making a 4th playoff appearance in his 5 seasons as manager. So wanted to definitely make sure that we had him back on board. As far as the bad news, we also got our pitching coach and several other coaches assigned. As far as the bad news, you can see we're 3.5 games back. We knew that the beginning of this month was going to be the tougher part of our schedule. We split with San Diego, but now we've lost back-to-back series at home to the Red Sox and the Brewers. So I'm guessing this 9-game homestand here is probably the longest homestand we have the rest of the season. So, although I can see a 9-game homestand right here later in the month, so clearly I was just making that up and lying to you. But with 3 games left against the Mets, definitely feel like we've got to get 2 out of 3 to at least salvage a 4-5 record on the homestand. And then when we look at the standings, that will help us close a game on the Mets, because right now we're kind of dropping back in both the Central Division as well as the wild card race. The Nationals, who we have coming up, are playing real well with 4 games in a row. It's not inconceivable if we don't do well with the Mets and then the Nationals come and we get swept by them. All of a sudden, we're just fighting for a wild card spot rather than fighting for a first round playoff bye, which was our goal just a week and a half ago. So mixed results again this week. You can see we did lose 2 out of 3 to the Mets, but we did take 2 out of 3 against Washington, and we did it the hard way on the road, losing the first game and then winning each of the next 2 in extra innings. So that should at the very least stabilize our playoff position, and you can see we are up now 7.5 on the Padres and the Nationals for the second wild card spot. But we have dropped to 5.5 behind Pittsburgh, and we're now 2 games behind the Mets for being the team that would at least get to host a wild card series. So the hope now is that we're heading into the easier part of the month. It's been a rough month for us so far. Definitely have a losing record rather than calculate it in my head. I'll just look it up. 6-8. So would certainly hope that with an easier schedule and a full 2 weeks of games left that we can still finish this month with a winning record. But clearly that's going to mean that we're going to have to start beating up on some of the weaker teams we're facing, notably the Cubs and the Reds within our own division. Another week in the books, and we did start getting healthy. Took the series against the Cubs, also took the series against Toronto. So we've got Miami and Cincinnati over the next week before facing Milwaukee. Checking in on the standings. Miami, pretty bad team. Cincinnati, pretty bad team. Milwaukee, who will have straddling the end of August and early September, a little bit better. We're up 7 to be in the playoffs, which is positive, but we're now 3 behind the Mets to be hosting a wild card game, and 4.5 behind the Cardinals in the NL Central to potentially be getting a first round bye. So I'm assuming we've got some games left against the Cardinals in September. I've got a 4-game series at home, so hopefully that will mean something for us. It does give us an opportunity right near the end of the season to potentially make up some ground on them, but we're going to need to basically take another 2 out of 3 against Miami and Cincinnati here, and then hopefully get a win in the first game of the series against Milwaukee to feel like we're in a decent position as we're leaving the month of August. And we didn't get what we were hoping for. We lost 2 out of 3 against Miami before taking the series against Cincinnati. Hopefully we can do well tonight against Milwaukee before we get to September roster expansion and some decisions there. And it was a very rough day for us yesterday on the last day of August. You can see we got shut out by Milwaukee, and Victor Serrano, our starting second baseman, is out for 7 to 8 months with a torn PCL. He is getting to the point where he's going to start making some decent money in arbitration next year. So he's a guy that we've got some decisions to make on, and we're going to have to make those decisions on him based on what we know right now. Really good glove, and his bat this year was as good as it's ever been for us. Put up a 3.1 WAR on the season. So the loss of Serrano, definitely not optimal. I do think, though, that with having brought on Juan Rivera through the trade last offseason, and also having made that trade for Nelson Torley that I talked about at the beginning of this episode, we do have some decent options. Certainly not optimal to be losing Serrano, but between those two guys, and then hopefully finding some help down in AAA to not just replace Serrano, but expand the roster by a couple players here on September 1st. Hopefully it doesn't prove to be a critical impact on our team here down the final weeks of the season and in the playoffs. Can see still 4.5 games behind Pittsburgh, so they obviously lost also, or 4.5 games behind the Cardinals, so they obviously also lost yesterday. Mets are kind of pulling away from us, 3.5 up on us for the wild card. Certainly would like to get by one or both of those teams, but the number of days we have left to do it is growing very short. And as we get ready for the final playoff push in the month of September, you can see that we've had our worst month of the season here in August. We were 500 in April. Then we played brilliant ball in May, excellent in June, still pretty solid in July, but worst month of the year for the Pirates in August. Still second in the National League in runs scored, second in runs allowed. So we've still been a unlucky team. If you look at the expanded standings, we're 3 games below where we should be. We should be 87 and 53, and the Cardinals are 3 games above where they should be. So we really should have the division. And quite honestly, if you look at the Pythagorean expectations, we really should have the second best record in the National League behind just the Mets. But not going to help us if we end up in the 5th or 6th seed when we get to the playoffs. I'd say the chance of the 6th seed is pretty remote at this point, given that we have that 6-game lead on the Rockies. But as we talked about, we're 3.5 behind the Mets and 4.5 behind the Cardinals, and time is getting short for us to make up that gap so we can be playing some home playoff games in October. And as we think about who we're going to bring up to the Major League squad, when we did get Nelson Torley back off the injured list after we acquired him for the Dodgers, we sent last year's Rookie of the Year, Sean Barley, down to AAA because he's still his option years and he was only hitting 200 at the Major League level. So we're going to bring Barley back up for the playoff push, and we're also going to allow Ethan Fox to make his Major League debut. He is the other player that we picked up in the trade where we acquired Mr. Montoya from the Angels, and that was still a very expensive trade for us because if you've been looking carefully, you would notice that our former farmhand Angel Aguilar, who we traded away to get those 2 players, is hitting .315 with 42 home runs and a AL best 123 runs batted in for the Angels this year. So we knew we had outfielders like Gonzalez, who just won National League Rookie of the Month for the 3rd time this past month. We knew we had guys like Gonzalez and Alex Ruacho, who we just promoted to AAA not that long ago, hit .309 in AA this year and hitting .305 in AAA. So we knew we had some good outfielders on the way and felt that we really needed to bolster our pitching staff with Mr. Montoya and also hopefully find a very versatile defensive player who could potentially be our starting 3rd baseman, who also hopefully has a average-ish Major League bat in Mr. Fox. And with Fox having hit .289 this year in AAA, 120-ish OPS plus and WRC plus, doesn't have a ton left to prove there. And he does have pretty decent defensive versatility, so we are going to let him make his Major League debut here in September. So Fox and Barley to the roster, and now the only decision is, and it's not really a decision, I think we do want to add a 13th pitcher rather than a 16th position player for these last couple weeks of the season as we hopefully try to make up some of the gap on the teams that we're chasing. And we're going to promote another youngster to our pitching staff. We do have a click properly. We do have a pretty intensive schedule. We've got a doubleheader followed by games for 6 straight days, 1 day off, and then we play every day for another week and a half before a final off day before that last 6 games against the Reds. So I think having another arm in the bullpen isn't going to hurt, and we're going to go with Luis Espana, 9th round pick back in 2038. Has really good stuff. His movement and control, not necessarily all that impressive, but he's had a good year for us, a 1.87 ERA in AA, followed by a 2.57 ERA in a pretty small sample size since we promoted him to AAA a few weeks ago. We'll give him a chance to work out of the back end of the bullpen and hopefully help make a difference for us down the stretch. You can see he's going to be in a middle relief role for us. And then looking at the lineups, as I mentioned, we've added Barley and Fox. Don't know that either of them is going to go into a starting position. Barley actually will. He'll be our DH against left-handers, it looks like. So see what hopefully Fox can do off the bench. And as I mentioned, I figured it would be Juan Rivera or Torley going in as our second baseman. I'm actually pleased it's Rivera. He hasn't played as much for us as I kind of hoped when we picked him up in that trade with Seattle. He's been really a utility player, starting just 34 games. So don't mind getting a little bit more of a look at him, probably hopefully getting 80 or 90 at-bats from him over these last 3 weeks of the season to really get a better idea of what he can possibly contribute offensively when he's out there every day. Another week is in the books, and time is growing short for the Pirates as we try to chase the Cardinals and the Mets. You can see we lost 2 of 3 to Milwaukee, and actually 3 of 4 when you include that the series started on a Monday, and then we split 4 games on the road with a relatively weak Marlins team, which is disappointing. So we are to a pretty critical week right now. We've got 2 games against the Yankees and then 4 at home against St. Louis. You can see we're 4.5 behind St. Louis at this point. And we're also 4.5 behind the Mets for the 4th wild card spot. And we're only 4.5 ahead of the Rockies. Fortunately, our magic number's down to 6 because it's so far to get to the Giants. But quite honestly, not that we're going to tank and not that we're going to try to lose games, but there certainly is an argument to be made that you would prefer to be the 3rd wild card this year, which means that you would be playing the Padres rather than the 2nd wild card, which means that you're going to most likely end up against the Mets at this point. But if that's the situation, we'll try to take our lumps. The Mets, for those of you who have been watching closely, have been our nemesis the last few years. They beat us in the NLCS 4-1 last season, and then I believe it was the season before when they took us out 2 straight games in a wild card series in New York. So our season has ended at the hands of the Mets 2 years in a row. So certainly a tough matchup. They have had historically a brilliant pitching staff, and you can see they still are first in all of baseball in earned run average. So that has continued. They're definitely a challenging team. Yankees having a respectable year, and then obviously we've got St. Louis at home. Need to realistically take 3 out of 4 there to have any chance at the division. And quite honestly, we probably need a sweep to really have a realistic chance of catching them. But at the very least, we need 3 out of 4 against St. Louis. And the hope is that we take both of the games against the Yankees, but clearly would probably expect a split. And we did get the split with the Yankees, but we're 6 games behind the Cardinals. So I'm guessing that they had 3 games in there and they won all 3 of them, if I'm doing the math correctly. So I said we needed 3 of 4 to be viable and probably needed to sweep the 4-game series with them having a 6-game lead right now. Even taking 3 of 4, we're a huge underdog to get the division. We'll see what we can do. One little good piece of news for us, Ricky Rios, who has been out for, I believe, a while. When did that injury happen? Yeah, a month and a half with that strained shoulder. He is back. We're going to put him on a rehab assignment, but he was pitching pretty well for us, 3.71 ERA over 59 2/3 innings. So we'll be good to get him back into the bullpen, hopefully over the next week or so. Check in on how our latest addition, Luis Espana, has been doing, and he's been fine. Only 2 appearances with a 1.93 ERA over 4 2/3 innings. So definitely don't feel any crazy urgency to move on from him, but clearly having Rios healthy and well for the playoffs should be a positive for our pitching staff. And we started off the series with the Cardinals with a loss, so we are now 7 games back. Clearly the division is fading away. Clearly a home series in the wild card is fading away, 6 games behind the Mets there. The goal at this point is to just hang on to the second wild card, number 5 overall seed in the National League. You can see our winning percentage has dipped to .587 over the last month or so. We were up above 600 when the month started. One other slightly good piece of news: Luis Flores looking like he could be back, or he is back now. He's ready to go. Fragile player, and he's also been out since mid-July, so we're going to give him a couple of days in AAA. Potentially maybe at the end of the Cardinals season if these guys have each gotten a little bit of playing time. Hopefully see Flores in the lineup 2 or 3 times and maybe a couple of appearances from Rios. Hopefully get those guys up to the roster and get them a little bit of action before we get to the playoffs. But it's a tough spot. Clearly we need to take 3 in a row against the Cardinals, and even if we take 3 in a row, we're going to be 4 games back with only 9 games left. So we are in a very difficult position at this point as far as our ability to win at NL Central. And we did win on Friday and Saturday against the Cardinals to give ourselves some hope, but they took the final game of the series to salvage the split. Clearly not what we needed. We're pretty much out of the division at this point, 6 games back with 9 games left. We've got 3 at home against Milwaukee, then 3 on the road at Cincinnati, and then we finish off with 3 at home against the Reds. So taking a look at the standings, it's not a horrible way to end the season. Milwaukee's still theoretically alive for a playoff spot, but 5 games behind the Padres, but they've at least got something to play for. The Reds at this point are 59 and 95, so hope is we can get healthy and healthy in terms of our wins and losses, and healthy in terms of our players who are on their rehab assignments over these last 9 games of the year. Rios has pitched 1 game down there. Might be time to just bring these guys up to the majors, but going to have to figure out how we're going to make spots for both of them on the roster. And thinking about our pitching staff, although Espana has pitched well with a 1.17 ERA over 7 2/3 innings, there's no other obvious players that we'd want to send down. We picked up Angel Calvan, as I talked about, to give us another lefty. He hasn't pitched incredibly well for us, but we are going to keep him up. So we're actually going to send Espana back to AAA. Kind of a bummer. He'll probably be an important member of our team next year, but want to get Rios back as soon as possible. He is a pretty proven major league pitcher at this point, and definitely someone that we want on the mound in critical situations. With that 70 movement, probably not a guy who's going to give up a ton of big home runs. And you can see he's going to slide right into a middle relief role, and our manager wants to use him more often. So good to have him back. If you looked at the pitching closely, you'll see that with 9 games left, we're kind of set up to get our top 4 pitchers each a couple of starts before we end up in the wild card. Big question is, can we get a 20-game winner in Tony Santana? 20 games are a very rare occurrence in baseball, not just in 2022, but certainly in mythical 2043. So it would be kind of cool to get the guy that we invested a lot of money in a few years ago to be a ace of our rotation, a 20-win season. So we'll see how he does with that. With Longoria, he's having another really good year. We just want to keep the fragile but brilliant pitcher healthy through his last couple of starts of the season. And Sean Barley, who's followed up his surprising Rookie of the Year season last year when he hit 286 with 9 home runs, and which was clearly a down year for National League rookies. He's been up and down between AAA and the majors this year, so we haven't necessarily made it easy on him. But he's hitting just 184 in the majors with 4 homers and 147 at-bats. He's nothing special defensively. We had tried to be giving him somewhat regular playing time against lefties since we brought him back up. Still not hitting. So we're going to demote him to AAA to make space for Mr. Flores, the former Rule 5 acquisition who hit 270 for us a year ago when he probably wasn't completely ready for the majors, and 316 this year with 7 homers and 256 at-bats. Love the personality, love the speed. He's a guy who can bunt, pretty decent contact hitter. He is fragile, but I think that bat hopefully can help us in these final days of the regular season. And he's going to step in as our leadoff hitter against lefties and our number 3 batter against righties, back into his starting position at first base. Hopefully, we've pretty much got who we want to have back at this point. Well, that's not really true. We'd love to have Victor Serrano back, but with that torn PCL and 7 months, he will not be back, and we have no hope for that. But we did have hope for Flores and Rios, and they're both back. Manho Lee, who's missed the entire year after getting hurt in spring training, is only about a week away. He was kind of going to be a back end of the bullpen pitcher for us. Wasn't even 100% sure that he was going to make the roster. You can see he's 34 years old now coming off of a pretty serious injury. So would love it if he can get a start or two in AAA rehab as the season finishes up there in Indianapolis. But even if he is healthy, I think he is a long shot to make our playoff roster. So from that perspective, we're not really waiting for anyone to come back at this point. Just hope that the 28 guys who are on our active roster right now can remain healthy over this last week and a half of the season. And finally, it seems like we're playing the type of baseball we've been trying to play over the last month and a half. Swept Milwaukee at home, swept Cincinnati at the home, 3 games left, or swept Cincinnati on the road, 3 games left against them at home to finish off the season. So we have clinched a playoff spot, 5 back in the division though, so clearly we are not going to catch the Padres as they have clinched the NL Central. We are 2 behind the Mets, so theoretically we could still pass the Mets to have a home playoff series or home field advantage for that National League wild card. Pretty unlikely. Let's see who the Mets are playing. Actually, I can see that from this screen if I would look at the right spot. They're going to be at Philadelphia to finish off the season. So they are playing an even worse team than we are, and we would basically need to win 3 in a row and need them to lose 3 in a row to get past them. So I think that the odds of that happening are pretty low. We did, in terms of individual achievements, get Tony Santana to a 20th win of the year. We've got our number 5 starter, Omar Gaona, going today. So we're going to go game by game now because I want to make sure that we've got Longoria and Santana set up to go in the first 2 games of the series against the Mets. They are, as you can see by looking at their 1-loss records and their earned run averages, and just this fact that we have them 1-2 in our rotation. They are the 2 best starters that we have, and we want to ensure that we're giving the Mets everything they can. It's going to be a difficult task for us against that team that's taken us out in the playoffs regularly, and they've got an even better pitching staff than we do. As we saw earlier, they've got the best pitching staff in baseball, and the last time we checked in, we were the second best pitching staff in the National League. So they're the one team that's better than us in the senior circuit. And we got a 12-1 win against Cincinnati, so I've won 7 in a row now. The Mets did lose, so they're only a game ahead of us now. As much as I'd love to try to pass them, we'll have to see who's set up to pitch. Yeah, we're fine with Bobby Gonzalez going. Actually, with the day off, we may have already seen, well, I can check this. Yeah, Longoria pitched 2 days ago, and Santana pitched 4 days ago, so we may need to bench Santana, who will be up for the final game of the season. Well, it depends if we're playing for something. If the Mets lose again and we win again, and we're actually playing for something, then we'd consider pitching Santana in that final game of the season. But we'll cross that bridge if and when we come to it. And there probably is not a bridge to cross, as we lost 3-0 to Cincinnati. The Mets did lose also, though, so now we've got to check what our record against the Mets was this season. And this is a tough decision because we are 4-3 against the Mets this year. So if we do end up in a flat-footed tie with them, I believe that means that we would get the home field advantage for the wild card. You may remember a couple years ago we finished in a flat-footed tie with them, but we were also 3-3 against them in the regular season, and the Mets ended up getting the home field advantage in that series that they beat us in for, I don't know if it was a coin flip or just because N is before P in the alphabet, but we've got a winning record against them this year. So from that perspective, there is an argument to be made that we let Santana take the mound to help us get home field, potentially. But if we let him take the mound today, that means that we're going with Longoria. And maybe not even Montoya. Longoria, Montoya, but maybe not Bobby Gonzalez in the playoff series against the Mets. So it's potentially Longoria, Montoya, and Gaona. And I don't think we can take that risk. Obviously, I want to win this game. Obviously, I'd love to pass the Mets. I don't think that we can count on the Phillies to actually sweep them. But we can't afford to use Santana. We need him for the playoffs. So we're going to bench him. And we are going to probably let our manager piece this game together with the bullpen. We don't have a starter ready. Let's see what he thinks. And we've forced the reliever Angel Calvan, who we picked up in that trade with Houston right before the trade deadline, into the starting rotation. You can see we haven't used him in a while. And he is a guy who certainly has the stamina and a 3-pitch arsenal. He hasn't been that good for us, 4.35 ERA over 31 innings pitched. But we are going to give him an opportunity to kind of earn the trust that we put in him when we made that trade for him by letting him pitch a game that still potentially could result in us having a home playoff series rather than being on the road. But Santana, as you know, we've benched, and Montoya, who slid into the bullpen to make room for Calvin. Calvin, we're also making sure that he doesn't pitch out of relief because we want to make sure that our proven starters are as ready as possible for that playoff series against the Mets. The big question is whether it will be 3 games in Queens or 3 games in Pittsburgh. And we're going to find out right now. 1-0 loss. So Calvin did his job. Went 5 2/3 innings, 2 hits, no earned runs, 8 strikeouts. So first time pitching in 9 days, and he did pretty much what we hoped he would do, but not quite enough. Interesting to see if the Mets also ended up winning, and they didn't. So there was potential that we could have tied them, and I think with us having had the 4-3 advantage in the regular season would have meant that that series would have been home, but I don't have any regrets. I mean, I guess theoretically maybe Santana would have spun a shutout, but Calvin in the bullpen allowing 1 run over 9 innings just got beat by a better team on that final day. Danny Cabasa, 1 hit over 7 1/3 innings. So yeah, we got 1 hit on the last day of the season. Did not really matter who we were going to have on the mound in that type of situation. So I'm not going to claim that it's not a bummer to have a 97-win team that's going to be having to not just play in a wild card series, but is going to be on the road for a wild card series. But it is what it is at this point. At least barring those last 2 losses, we were playing better over the last couple of weeks of the season. Got a 97 win year with this Pirates team. Got back on track with a 13-9 record in September. Dipped a little bit to be 3rd in the NL in runs scored, 2nd in the NL in runs allowed, behind only, I'm assuming, this Mets team that we're going to be facing in the playoffs for a 3rd straight season. But when you look at these Pirates and our small market size, pathetic fan loyalty, mediocre fan interest, we did finally start selling out some games at the end of the year, which allowed our revenue to go up a little bit. But we're now 6 years into this playthrough, and we've now got 4 winning seasons and 4 playoff appearances, and the .599 winning percentage we had this year was the best we've ever done. So it stinks that we're going to be in a wild card series again, but I feel like we're doing the right things with this team. You know, to be 28th in payroll and 29th in budget, and that's an improvement from when we were last in both of those, and to be able to at this point string together 3 consecutive playoff seasons. I feel like we're playing well. It's just as long as we're dealing with the penny pinching Robert Nutting, it's never going to be easy. And even though we're not going to be doing the playoffs until our next episode, wanted to make sure that we did move Calvin back to a relief role, move to our 4-man rotation for the playoffs, make sure that both Mr. Santana and Mr. Montoya were no longer being forced to be rested. The one thing that you probably saw that is interesting is that, according to manager Jan Vasquez, Omar Gaona is going to be our number 4 starter instead of Mr. Montoya. I don't know how I feel about that. Actually going to set it back to the 5-man rotation just to make it easy to stack up their stats. And Montoya has been good. I'm sorry, Gaona has been good. 11-9 record, 3.59 ERA. It's not an issue we're going to have to figure out for a wild card series, since that's only going to go 3 games. But if we are fortunate enough to get by that powerful Mets juggernaut and end their efforts to defend their World Series championship, then we're going to get to an NLDS where who we have as our 4th starter will actually matter, and we may have to overrule Mr. Vasquez. But if we have to make that decision in our next episode, it is fantastic news, because that will mean that we got past the New York Mets. And we will find out how we do in that wild card series when we face off against those arch rival New York Mets in the postseason for a 3rd consecutive year in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.